Tony seems to get his kindness, charm, and sense of humor from his mother. Not her religious faith, though, but it must be said she tells Tony about telling off her pastor when he preaches that AIDS is God's punishment for homosexuality. That's not true. I don't even think there's no venereal diseases that are, like, really in the Bible, so that's not true. They didn't even know AIDS existed back then. Are you serious? That's such a dumb thing to say. And like any young boy, he likes to go out and drink and dance and hopefully meet someone, only he's not interested in quick hookups, at least not at the stage of life during which we really get to know him. He wants an actual relationship. I mean, he's getting pretty late in his life, like in his young life. So he needs to find someone to have a true connection to, and not just for sex, you know. It's understandable. For one thing, dealing with any hearing guy is a big hassle, since as his and his friends discuss over pizza after an unsuccessful club night, hearing guys see deaf guys as either a project or a charity case, even though they went there by themselves, so that wouldn't make sense at all. For a hookup, it's barely worth the effort. I mean, you have to put a lot of effort in to get people to understand you if you're deaf, so that's kind of the struggles, and especially because he's gay, and even if you're not deaf, undeaf, people that can hear have trouble finding mates as a gay person, let alone being deaf, so it's a big struggle, and they kind of illustrate that. But more importantly, Tony's at a point in his life where he really wants to get serious about both his love life and his career, especially after his friend's murder puts things in perspective for him. Like, life can be really short, and you gotta live it out to the fullest, and this kind of motivates him to try to do some great things in his life, and make an attempt at least. He relocates to the college town of Madison, both because the presence of a school for the deaf there means he'll be able to find friends and work easier, and because student photographers might be able to help him put together the portfolio he'll need to make a go of things in New York down the line someday, because he wants to become a model. He's like an aspiring model. That's kind of like the backstory. It's an actual person, but that's kind of like who he is as a person. There's an entire sequence in which he gets rejected for jobs almost immediately due to his deafness, only to stumble across a friendly manager at a clothing store who's happy to talk to him, in American Sign Language no less, because his own sister is deaf. So how lucky is that? I mean, a gift from God. You walk into a store and someone can speak sign language. That's not a common thing. Again, deaf people aren't just walking amongst us casually. His joy upon getting the job, jumping up and down on the sidewalk, pumping his fists, is infectious. It's like, you feel so good for him. There's so much emotion built up throughout the episode for this guy, just for it to be crushed later on. It's such a sad episode. So is so much of what he does, and this is where Burford really shines as an actor. He gives Tony's rapport with the people he cares about so much warmth that it seems to radiate out of the screen, with his buddies, his mom and sisters, and with Jeffrey Dahmer, which not going to end well for him, of course. Because the problem is that even though he's moved to Madison, he still comes home every few weekends to visit his family and hang out with his friends at the clubs, because he can't just leave those people forever, type of thing. Which is where a handsome, if basic, blonde white guy with big glasses makes eyes at him, leading his friend to encourage him to go over and strike up a conversation. So he meets Jeffrey Dahmer, of course. And obviously it goes really well for most of the time, and then Jeffrey Dahmer's temptations just take over, and it's really sad, you know. Amazingly, they do more than just talk and drink and go back to Jeff's place for the inevitable, which we know what's going to happen when you go back to Jeffrey Dahmer's apartment. Tony actually refuses to go that first night, not because he's spooked by or disgusted with Jeff in some ineffable way, but because Jeff is absolutely hammered, and you can get the sense of watching it that Tony feels that going home with him would be inappropriate. So Tony has morals, and he's lucky. I mean, he died still, but he's lucky that he didn't go the first night, so he could actually build a connection with someone before he went out. He went out with an affectionate partner. Obviously, he got killed by that partner, but that's not because Jeffrey hated him or anything. It's just what Jeffrey does. I mean, let's be real. Instead, they meet up at a later date for a date, like literally a date. Like, this is going to be an actual relationship. We don't want to just go back to an apartment hammered and have sex, you know. That's not what Tony wanted. They go to a Glamour shots, and Tony poses for pics while Jeff watches. Eventually, the photographer even hands Jeff the camera to take a few shots of his own, and these two have a great bonding moment together. It's really beautiful to watch this. I mean, and the fact that we know what's probably going to happen and what did happen to Tony, it's so sad at the same time watching this. They get food and sodas and flirt with an earnestness that can melt your heart, especially when you read between the lines of the things Jeff writes to Tony as they communicate with written notes. It's kind of a weird dynamic. Obviously, being deaf, you can't talk to the person, so you have to write down what you want to say about them. It's like texting, but in person. It's kind of crazy. You must be the most interesting person I've ever met, he tells Tony before writing. Is it exhausting to have to work so hard to be understood? You kind of get the feeling Jeff's wanted to talk to someone about this very topic his entire life, because they can kind of connect in this way, and that's kind of why they have a relationship at the moment. Yeah. Anyway, Tony is a positive influence on Jeffrey, which is great. I mean, Tony played a really big role in Jeffrey's life that no one really thought of, and he stops drinking alone, and on weekdays he tells his dad and stepmom when they come for a visit to his shockingly clean apartment. His dad's like, dang, you're really starting to look up and see and do what you were intended to do and be successful and be a good person. And Jeff can attribute that to Tony, even though he doesn't really reference that to his father. Well, shockingly clean by Jeff's standards. I'm happy, he tells them. It seems like he means it. Like, it's not like just a cold-hearted, I'm happy. Like, yeah. And the whole time this is going down, you just feel like screaming at him, like, get your act together, This guy is nice, funny, smart, handsome, interesting, and most importantly, he likes you, and you're gonna inevitably kill him, which we knew happened. He's willing to give you the time of day when you're not both wasted. You'd have had a real relationship here, but instead his temptations took over, and it's pretty sad, Of course, it's already too late, far too late for that. Jeff cleans up his apartment for the dual purpose of impressing his visiting dad and stepmom, and also Tony, of course. He refrains from drugging Tony when the poor guy finally comes over. They have normal person connections and go to normal person sleep. But when Tony has to leave for work back in Madison the next morning, Jeff reaches into the bedside drawer next to the nice clean bed where they spent a nice normal night and pulls out a bloody hammer sitting atop a pile of Polaroids of nude dismembered bodies. So, just casually saying that, I don't know. There would never be any going back for Jeffrey. There would never be some Mr. Right that could come along and save him from himself, or save anyone else from him. When he chose to start killing, his fate was set in stone, and so was Tony's. So that's kind of the sad reality when you're watching this. Though Jeff initially lets Tony leave without attacking, Tony has to return to the apartment because he forgot his keys, and Jeff can restrain himself no longer. In the episode's closing act, his distraught family, completely ignored by the cops who ask his mom if Tony had any history of gang activity. Of course she would ask her that. Led a search for him, a search in which Jeff anonymously donates money. It's a ghoulish act, echoed by a call he places to another victim's family to tell them to stop looking for him since he's disappeared into the vortex. I don't know if that actually happened, but if it did, that's wow. A reference to a macabre board game Jeff made up as a kid called Infinity Land, which he and Tony play using animal wishbones as game pieces. Yeah, you heard me right. And after we see his mother staring and crying at the dining room table chair where Tony used to sit, Jeff cooks and eats Tony's liver. I didn't even know that was his liver at first, but it was fucking disgusting. It's the first act of cannibalism we see him commit, and it's deployed at the most emotionally upsetting moment imaginable. It's kind of crazy, you watch this episode, you watch how the purpose of Jeff's drinking has evolved throughout his life. As a teenager, he drank to suppress his urges, to numb his pain. Of course, he became a full-blown alcoholic in short order, so at a certain point, the motive for drinking becomes less relevant than the biochemical compulsion to do so. But as an adult, whether at the clubs or the bathhouses or taking guys back to his place, he drinks not to suppress his urges, but as an inhibition. It's not to numb his pain, but his guilt. I was under the influence of alcohol, that's why I did that, Empathetically but unsparingly written and directed with painstakingly restraint. This is a bravura episode of television. It is a very hard show to recommend. to watch it is to see something beautiful destroyed, and it's kind of depressing. So if you don't want to watch it, go ahead. But my goodness, it's depressing. Yeah, that's all. Still gotta talk about The Walking Dead. I'm not sure when I'm gonna do that though. Here in a little bit, I will. But hopefully, you guys have a good rest of your day.